So, he was making headlines earlier this offseason as the last guy who is arbitration eligible to sign a contract. But now, when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, they might just have a little bit too many forwards up there, and they might still be in a position to trade away Nick Robertson. With all this in mind, let's dive into an article posted onto SportsIllustrated.com by Jacob Ponturi that talks about 3 landing spots for Nick Robertson that make sense in his opinion. This article, published on August 13th, 2025, will be linked in the description, but before we dive into that, let's get into the context here. Nick Robertson is 23 years old, 5'9", 179, who had recently signed a contract for 1 season that costs $1.8 million a year. It's not bad, honestly. 1-year deal, less than $2 million for a guy who posted up 15 goals in 69 games played the most recent season. 22 points there, so maybe not the best assist guy. But Nick Robertson has always been defined by his finishing ability ever since his days in the OHL, and for a good chunk of time with the Marlies, this guy was always a goal-scoring stud. And in the playoffs this most recent season, Robertson had 2 points in 3 games as Toronto ended up getting eliminated there. But Robertson is so young, he is so good at scoring goals that you kind of have to think, if this guy were to hit the market, there would probably be a bunch of teams interested. If not, there might have already been some teams that expressed interest in this guy before he signed his contract. With that in mind, let's go over onto the article posted on Sports Illustrated Breakaway and dive into these teams that Ponturi writes about that could be vying for Robertson and his services here. With the Toronto Maple Leafs salary cap situation needing resolved, okay, great grammar there, before the regular season begins, this young forward could be the odd man out. The article dives into Robertson, how he ended up avoiding arbitration by agreeing to a 1-year, $1.8 million deal. Also happening this summer is constant trade talks surrounding this Maple Leafs forward. Despite the talent that Robertson possesses, he doesn't quite fit into Toronto's long-term plans. Even as the roster was overhauled this offseason, Robertson still projects to be a 3rd or 4th line winger in this lineup. It's led many, including Elliot Friedman, to speculate on if a trade might occur. With the Maple Leafs salary cap situation needing resolved, okay, does it need to be resolved or it needs resolve? Not needing resolved. Before the regular season begins, Robertson could be the odd man out. If that's the case, there are multiple teams around the NHL that will be eager to bring him in and offer a fresh start. Yeah, okay, I promise not to bring up the needing resolved thing anymore. Either you need resolve or you need it to be resolved. Needing resolved implies that resolved is a noun, which it is not. Chicago is listed here as the first destination for Nick Robertson. They want to take the next step, and there's mounting pressure for the organization. He could be a potential fit in Chicago. They need to insulate Bedard and other young players like Ryan Green, Frank Nazar, and Landon Slaggert. Those two are not the ones that I would have brought up in Frank Nazar's company, but still. Detroit is mentioned here as the second team, and then you also have Pittsburgh, which is super interesting because, of course, Pittsburgh has Kyle Dubas, and Dubas loves to grab guys that he has been familiar with in the past, whether they are former Toronto Maple Leafs or former Sioux Greyhounds. But this video, of course, is a Red Wings-centered video. Let's go out there and talk about this here. The Detroit Red Wings are trying to return to postseason contention, but patience is beginning to thin with GM Stevie Y. They need more scoring depth to contend in the Atlantic Division, and Robertson would certainly add to that. When you look at the potential lineup for Detroit, veterans like Patrick Kane or James Van Riemsdyk are set to play on the top line. What, really? No. Patrick Kane's going to be on the second line, bro. While both can still contribute, having more scoring depth further down the lineup and more competition for the top 6 is the best safeguard against a drop-off from either aging winger. Well, This article certainly is taking its fair share at discrediting Patrick Kane, but assuming that Patrick Kane sticks on the line with Alex DeBrincat on the second line there, and that JVR potentially takes on a first-line role with Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond, having Nick Robertson as a potential third-liner would probably be kind of similar to what he's got going on right now in Toronto, I'm not gonna lie. But still, Detroit is not fixed with their top six, and there always are some opportunities for other guys to break onto that Larkin and Raymond line. We saw Marco Kasper up there, we saw Elmer Soderblom, we saw a bunch of dudes kind of get their chance at playing with the top guys. If Nick Robertson were brought into the mix, and by the way, you gotta remember he's only 23 years old, so there still is more time for him to develop, I have no doubt that the coaching staff would potentially see it as a fit in some capacity. Try to get a goal-scoring phenom out there who can play with some guys who can get him the puck. Larkin and Raymond both have pace. Robertson, I'd say, is quick-footed as well. He is kind of aggressive too, but he does provide the most value when he is scoring 20 to 25 goals a year, which he has yet to do, but then again, you think about it like, okay, well, the games played hasn't really been on his side. 15 goals in 69 games, 14 goals in 56 games. If this guy gets an 82-game season, then you're probably looking at a first-time 20-goal scorer, and maybe even a little bit more than that if he's playing with the right line mates. Even if things don't work out all too well, having Robertson on a third line with Appleton or Berggren does sound like an interesting combination there. I'd like to see if Berggren's playmaking can combine with Nick Robertson's positional play. Honestly, when you think about what the Red Wings already have, Nick Robertson could be seen as like a poor man's Alex DeBrincat. Essentially, the way they play is kind of similar in my opinion, plus they're both kind of small. So having DeBrincat as one small-ish goal scorer on a line and Nick Robertson as another goal scorer on another line, it does sound like a pretty interesting way to run your team. And then JVR can add that scoring touch onto the third line with Appleton too. There's a lot of options here. There could be some flexibility with the way the Wings decide to move around the forwards if a Nick Robertson-like piece were to be added. Now, as to what it would cost, that is up for debate, really. I mean, there have been some folks speculating that maybe a third-round pick or a second-round pick is all it would take to get Nick Robertson at this stage. The Maple Leafs can't really afford to have too many forwards anymore. They need to get rid of at least one guy. So if Robertson is the odd man out, then maybe the asking price isn't really too high. Maybe there's not really too big of a need for Toronto to grab all these extra pieces coming back the other way. But whether it is Chicago or Detroit or Pittsburgh, it doesn't seem like Nick Robertson would fetch an extremely big trade package return. At least that's what it seems like right now. So with all this in mind, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're a Detroit Red Wings fan, would you bite on the idea of Nick Robertson for, let's say, a third or a second or a B- prospect? Maybe not really the biggest trade package in exchange, but all for this guy who can score quite a few goals at the NHL level at 23 years old. Is it worth it to you? Let me know in the comment section all your opinions. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.